They said I was the principal's favorite, but only I knew what she did to me when the lights went out. My name is Francine Holloway. I'm 76 years old, and I don't know how long I've had this story stuck in my throat, but I know that today it will come out, if only as a splinter pulled out with rusty pliers. I was very young when I ended up at St. Lydia's Home for Girls, an orphanage with a beautiful name and an empty promise. My mother left me at the door with a bag in my hand and a quick kiss on the forehead, like someone who delivers the wrong package and runs off before they know it. She never came back. Principal Margaret, or Miss Margaret as she was called, was one of those women who smiles with her teeth, but her eyes don't follow. She was tall, always wearing a pulled-back bun and a straight dress, and looked like a saint in front of the others. But it only took nightfall for sanctity to disappear. She said I was special, that I had an obedient way, a twinkle in my eye, but no one ever asked why that sparkle turned into a shadow at night. At the time, I didn't understand much. I just felt it. And what I felt, my dear, was fear. Fear of hearing her footsteps in the hallway, fear of the doorknob turning, fear of looking into her eyes and losing myself. The first time she called me was on a muggy summer morning. I remember because the old fan made a noise that sounded like a moan. She entered the dormitory slowly, with the light of the lantern sweeping across the beds. She stopped at the edge of mine and whispered my name as if it were a secret. Francine, come with me, darling. I got up without asking, because there, asking was a sign of rebellion, and a rebellious girl didn't get dessert or a hot bath or clothes without holes. And above all, she didn't get adopted. Her office smelled of lavender and old wood. It was always very clean, very tidy. On the wall, a photo of her with the city's bishop. On the table, a plate of sweets and a notebook where she wrote down everything she wanted us to forget. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked me, sitting down in the leather armchair and crossing her legs slowly. I shook my head. No, I didn't. I did know, or rather, I felt it, because children can sense when something is wrong, even if they can't explain it. Because you're special. Girls like you need attention. They need to learn what it means to be good, really good. She said this while smoothing my hair, her other hand flipping through her notebook. That cold touch on my scalp gave me the willies, but I smiled. I smiled because that's what she taught me, that a smile opens doors, and if you open a door, you get out. That was just the first night. The others came one after the other, like a repetition of the same old tape, always at the same time, always with the same conversation about adoption, behavior and secrets that good girls know how to keep. The next morning, she praised me in the refectory. She told the other nuns that I was an example, the best-behaved girl in the little girl's wing. The others looked at me with envy. They thought I was the favorite. They thought I'd be the first to leave. And me? I just wanted to disappear. There was one time when Sister Claire, the only one who seemed to have a bit of compassion in her eyes, saw me coming back to the dormitory with puffy eyes. She pulled me aside and asked, "Are you all right, Francine?" And I said, "I just have a stomachache, sister." She pressed her lips together, as if she knew that wasn't all. But she didn't say anything else. Nobody ever did. A week later, Sister Claire was transferred to another shelter in the north of the state. "Order from the director," said the cook quietly. From then on, the visits increased. Smiling couples came almost every week. They passed through the classrooms, looked at the girls, asked their names, stories and qualities. When it was my turn, the principal would put her hand on my shoulder and say, "This is Francine, an angel, polite, discreet, perfect for a loving home." But it always went wrong. They'd look at me for a while and then say they'd think it over, and the principal would get furious. She'd call me back to that lavender, scented room. She said I wasn't trying hard enough, that I needed to train harder. That's when I began to understand. Adoption wasn't for me, not while she still wanted me to stay. And, oh my goodness, she did. If you've made it this far, please leave a like. Every like is like a hug for this old lady. And tell me in the comments where you're hearing this story from. My chest is tight today, you see. On those mornings when the sun rose lazily through the dirty windows of the orphanage, I already knew what the day was going to be like. I'd wake up with a heavy head, my stomach in knots, as if my body knew it was experiencing something wrong, even though I couldn't name it. The other girls stretched out on the iron beds, whispered about the donated dolls, and laughed at the nicknames they made up for each other. And what about me? I got dressed in silence, my hands shaking, and I was getting ready to face the routine with the mask that the principal liked so much. That of the model girl, the one who never questioned anything. Every Monday, there was an inspection. She would pass by with that clipboard in her hands, looking at the sheets, the folded clothes, the Bibles on the bedside table. When she got to my bedside, she always gave me that dry smile and said, "Well done, my dear," and I held my breath, because I knew what was coming next. I knew it was just a warning. Sometimes she didn't even wait for it to get dark. If she didn't have an appointment, the excuse would come, "Francine, come with me to the sewing room, we need to adjust your clothes." But nobody sewed anything there. What she did was adjust something else. The fear inside me. I couldn't understand how nobody noticed. Or maybe they did and pretended not to, because it's easier to think that a quiet girl is just shy than to accept that there's something rotten behind the walls of the place that bears the name of a saint. One afternoon, I went down to the library. It was my refuge when I could escape without attracting attention. I would sit in a corner between the bookshelves and pretend to read something. But that time, the principal suddenly walked in, with a well-dressed man by her side, a church pastor, if I'm not mistaken. They were talking quietly, but I heard when she said, "Francine is special. She's almost ready for a new family." At that moment, my heart pounded. I thought that maybe this time it was true. Maybe I really was leaving. I clung to that idea like someone clinging to a rotten branch in the middle of a current. But when they called me to talk, I realized it wasn't adoption at all. The man wanted to open a new orphanage in another city, and she was offering the model girl as living proof of her work. I felt an emptiness in my chest that I can't explain. I wasn't a child, I was a showcase, a trophy that she displayed when she needed to prove that she was good at what she did. That night, she showed up again, as always, but something was different about her. The way she touched me, the tone of her voice. She seemed angrier, more impatient. She said that I needed to stop looking around corners, that my face showed too much. She said that if anyone started to get suspicious, I'd be sent away, but not to a house with a family. I knew what she meant, and at that moment, for the first time, something hit me that I'd never felt inside. Anger. Anger at myself for never being able to say no. Anger at her for turning me into this. Anger at the world for not seeing it. But the worst thing of all was afterwards. When I went back to the dormitory and lay on that hard bed, unable to sleep, I'd look up at the ceiling and feel like something was growing inside me. It wasn't just pain, it was a kind of tiredness that made me too heavy to be a child, and I was only 7. One day, a new girl arrived at the orphanage, Amy, blonde, with her hair tied back with a blue ribbon. She taught non-stop. She sat next to me in the cafeteria and started asking me questions as if her life depended on it. Where I was from, why I was there, if I'd ever seen a squirrel up close. She was a little hurricane, and I, who no longer even remembered what it was like to have a real conversation, just watched. But little by little, I started to loosen up. Amy made me laugh, and that was dangerous, because smiling without pretending was almost a luxury in there. We started meeting hidden away in the back courtyard. She liked to make up stories, saying that one day she was going to run away to California, live by the sea, open a cafe with pink cakes. I listened to that and wanted to believe it. One day, she asked me why I kept so quiet when the principal came, and I said it was because I was scared. She laughed. "Afraid of what? That old woman isn't scary at all." And I just said, "You'll see." It didn't take long. A few weeks passed, and one night I heard the doorknob turning earlier than usual. It wasn't for me, it was for Amy. She didn't even come back to the dorm that night. When she showed up the next morning, she seemed like a different girl. She didn't speak, she didn't smile. Her eyes, once bright, were dull. I understood everything, and so did she. After that, we never looked at each other again. I spent weeks trying to understand why the principal had changed the target. And the answer came one Sunday, when she called me into her classroom and told me that I was getting full of it, that I needed to remember who was boss. She was losing control, and she used Amy to show me that I could change dolls whenever I wanted. From then on, I stopped trying to be the favorite. It was no longer a question of pleasing, it was survival. I started pretending harder, to be invisible. I didn't answer too much, I didn't look too much, just enough not to attract attention. And even then, she wouldn't let go. One night I prayed quietly, something I hadn't done since my mother left me. I asked to get out of there, to disappear, to do anything except to carry on being that. The next day, my name was called over the loudspeaker. He said he had a visitor. My heart raced. Had someone finally chosen me? Had that prayer worked? But it wasn't adoption. It was something worse. The call on the loudspeaker made my legs fail me for a second. I was so unaccustomed to being remembered there that any attention seemed suspicious. I got up from the bench in the cafeteria, not knowing where to look, with my plate still full. The other girls stopped chewing for a moment. Some looked envious, others pitying. I couldn't even tell anymore. The secretary was waiting for me near the boardroom. When she saw me, she gave me that automatic smile she uses with everyone, as if she were offering me a prize. But her voice was in a hurry. "Francine, your visitor has arrived. Get ready quickly." And she pushed me in the direction of the changing room, without giving me a name, a face, or a reason. I went without asking. Obedience was my best friend. In the mirror, I fixed my hair as best I could, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and fastened my borrowed shoes that never fit properly. My heart was racing so fast that it felt like it wanted to burst out of my mouth. What if it was a family? What if the nightmare finally had an end date? I entered the room with my gaze lowered. But when I raised my head, what I saw wasn't a couple with an adoption folder in their hands, or a smiling woman offering me a home. It was just a man, alone. A light suit, polished shoes, a smile in the corner. I'd never seen him before. He looked too important for the place, and too comfortable in the principal's leather chair. Miss Margaret was beside him, as usual. Hands folded, chin up, the same sweet tone as a snake on a mass day. "Francine, this is Mr. Arthur Beaumont. He's one of our benefactors, very generous to our institution." The sentence was loaded with something I couldn't decipher. Arthur just looked at me with an interest that made me cringe inside. He took too long with that look. He analyzed my arms, my face, my eyes. I tried to smile, but my face stiffened. "The principal has told me a lot about you, young lady," he said finally. "He said you were special, that you have manners." I nodded. Nothing more. Silence protected me, as always. He pulled out a sheet of paper from his briefcase and showed it to Miss Margaret. The two of them talked as if I wasn't there. Words like travel, authorizations, extra contribution, and discretion. I got lost in the middle of it all. Fear began to coil in my belly like a snake waking up. It wasn't adoption. I already knew that. After the conversation, Margaret dismissed me. She said I could go back to the cafeteria, but the way she spoke, dryly, hurriedly, put me on alert. She never let anyone leave without a pat on the shoulder or a goodbye. This time there was nothing, just the door closing behind me with a snap that sounded like a warning. At night the routine was the same, but the atmosphere was different. She didn't come to my room. She didn't appear in the hallway. She didn't call me into her office. And that was scarier than when she did. I knew something worse was coming, something that required preparation. The next morning I was taken for a medical examination. I'd never had one before. She was a lady in a lab coat, as cold as the walls of the ward. She measured me, weighed me, and examined me as if I were cattle about to be branded. I stood there, my feet cold, and my heart pounding in my neck, not really understanding. All she said was, "Travel protocol." When I tried to ask where, she replied, "You're going to meet important people. You need to be in good condition." And she left without looking back. I went back to the dormitory with my head boiling. The girls asked what it was. I invented that maybe I'd be transferred to a better school. It was an easy lie, but nobody believed it. Neither did I. Over the next week, my routine became even stranger. I was taken off laundry duties. I stopped cleaning the corridors. I started having private lessons with an employee I'd never seen before, a woman who spoke too quietly and taught me how to answer certain questions with specific phrases, as if it were rehearsal. She told me that I should keep my voice down, smile just the right amount, and always be grateful for everything. "Gratitude is your greatest weapon, Francine," she said, and that gave me goosebumps. The other girls started whispering. Amy looked at me from a distance, saying nothing. Her eyes were no longer the same. I knew she had understood what was going on, and in a corner of me, I hated that she had, because that made everything real. At the end of that month, I was given a small suitcase with new clothes, real clothes, no frayed donations. Everything was hand-picked. Even a hair bow came with it, a light green one, just like the one the cook's daughter wore when she came to visit her mother. Miss Margaret showed up that night. She came into the dormitory and called me by name, her voice firm, without the usual sugar. When I got up, she just said, "You're leaving early tomorrow. Be kind, be helpful, and everything will work out?" I didn't reply. I couldn't. I just stood there, bow in hand, looking at her like someone seeing a fire through a window. And she turned away, satisfied. I lay in bed sleepless, hungry and out of breath. The fan was making its usual noise. Outside, the crickets sang as if the world were normal. But I knew it. This wasn't adoption. It was something else. It was another prison, disguised as an opportunity. And I was being taken away for a price I didn't even know. I woke up before the sun, not because I wanted to, because the body doesn't sleep properly when it senses disaster. The other girls were still breathing slowly, lost in dreams or nightmares. You could never tell which was which. I lay there for a few more minutes, trying to understand if it was all real. But the suitcase at the foot of the bed left no room for doubt. It was real. I was going to get out of there. But instead of relief, I felt a pit in my stomach. I got up slowly, trying not to make a sound. At that moment, silence was the only thing that still belonged to me. I got dressed in the clothes they had sorted, a light dress, shined shoes, and the green bow tie. I looked in the mirror for a moment. The reflected image looked like a happy little girl, ready to find a new home. But I knew what was behind the pretty ribbon. When I arrived at the boardroom, Mr. Arthur was already waiting for me. He had brought a big black car, the kind you only saw in old movies. He smiled as if he was meeting an old friend again, but didn't say much. He just nodded, as if to say, "Let's go." Miss Margaret kissed me on the forehead, a cold, dry kiss that only served to confirm what I already knew. She was giving me away, for good. She didn't even wish me luck. She didn't even feign sadness. She just said goodbye with a, "Behave yourself." I got into the car without looking back. The journey was long. The road never seemed to end. There was no conversation, no radio, just the noise of the engine and my thoughts trying to outrun fate. Arthur looked out of the window with that air of someone who has everything under control. From time to time, he took a piece of paper out of his pocket and read it, like someone checking instructions. After hours, we arrived at a huge, isolated house with high walls and locked windows. It was no ordinary residence. It was more like a retreat, or a place where you keep what you don't want to show the world. I was greeted by an older woman with a strange accent who examined me with her eyes without even saying good afternoon. She took me to a small but clean room. She explained the rules in a few words: timetables, chores, silence. She said that there were other girls, but that each one had her own corner. "Here, everyone has their own time," she murmured. I spent the first day trying to understand where I was. The walls were plain, the furniture old, and the strong smell of disinfectant made my nose sting. I saw two girls in the corridor, both with their heads down, walking fast, as if every second outside the room was a sin. We didn't say a word. In the evening, there was a knock on my door. It was Arthur, with a glass of milk and a smile that chilled me to the bone. He sat down in the chair by the bed and said that everything was going to be different there, that I should feel special, because he handpicked me, that not just anyone had the honor of being trained by him. I didn't understand everything, but I understood the tone. I understood that this was only the beginning. Over the next few days, I was molded. Like clay, I learned to sit a certain way, respond with a certain tone, walk with a certain posture. The woman with the accent taught me how to smile at the right time, when to lower my eyes, when to accept without hesitation. It all sounded as if I was being prepared to be shown off, not as a daughter, as a product. Meals were eaten in silence. We sat at the table, each in our own place, and ate without raising our heads. No one looked at anyone. Nobody asked anything. It was as if the words had been ripped out of us right at the entrance. I tried to remember Amy, the orphanage, the few times I really laughed, but it all seemed so far away that I doubted whether I had really experienced it. One night, I woke up to the sound of the door opening slowly. It was Arthur. He came in without asking permission. He sat on the end of the bed and started talking as if he were continuing a conversation he had started hours before. He said I was doing well, that obedient girls were rewarded, that if I did everything right, I might even have a good life, maybe even be adopted by someone very special. While he was talking, all I could think about was disappearing, to be someone else, of being nobody. I pretended to sleep, and yet he stayed there, watching, for long minutes, until he got up and left, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I couldn't eat. The bread made me sick. The water burned my throat. The woman noticed. She asked if I was sick. I shook my head. It was a lie. I was rotting inside. But saying that didn't change anything. I started counting the days by the knocks on the door. When they came with the tray, it was just another meal. When they came with that smile, it was something else. And each time it happened, I died a little more. But never completely, because in some way that I can't even explain, some part of me resisted. It was at this time that I met Ava, one of the girls who was also there. We'd catch glimpses of each other in the corridors, but it wasn't until one day in the courtyard that she approached me and left a piece of paper in my pocket, without saying anything. When I opened it, it read, "You're not alone." That gave me a thread of life, a sliver, but it was enough for me to breathe again, a little. I kept that piece of paper as if it were gold. I folded it up very small and hid it inside my pillowcase. At night, when everything was quiet, I would slip my hand underneath and touch it just to remind myself that someone could see me, that I wasn't entirely lost, that Ava existed. From then on, I started to pay attention to her. Discreet, she always walked straight, with light steps, her hair tied up the way we all had to. But the look was different. She was no longer afraid. She had something that I only understood later, certainty. She already knew how everything worked there, and more than that, she knew how to survive. One of those mornings when the woman with the accent took us out to tidy up the garden, Ava approached us from behind the shed like someone looking for a hoe. She whispered softly, "Wednesday night, behind the warehouse." That's all. She didn't even say her name, but I understood, and I waited. Over the next few days, time dragged on. Arthur continued his theatrics. He left sweets on the tray, asked if I was comfortable, said he wanted me in a good mood. I smiled as I had been taught. Inside, I wanted to disappear, but I followed the role. I followed Ava. That Wednesday came. I feigned a headache to avoid the etiquette class. I spent the rest of the day locked in my room, lying on my side, counting the seconds until it got dark. When the lights finally went out, I waited for the silence to spread through the house like fog, and then I went. The walk to the warehouse was short, but each step seemed to take hours. My heart was pounding, my hands were sweating. I thought I was going to faint, but I arrived. Ava was there, sitting on the concrete floor with a flashlight covered in a red cloth. The dim light barely illuminated her face, but you could tell she had done this before. She sat down next to me, unceremoniously. "I know what you're going through." I didn't answer. The lump in my throat wouldn't let me. "Arthur is the same with everyone. He promises you a new life, treats you like a princess, and the next thing you know, you've become a shop window doll." She looked around before continuing. "I've been here for 2 years. Before me there was Zoe, before her Clara, and God knows how many others. That sentence hit me like a punch. 2 years. How can anyone endure 2 years like that?" I wanted to ask, but she kept going. "Most don't last. They either turn into shadows or break." I broke down. Then I came back. And now I'm waiting for the right time. She pulled a piece of map out of her pocket. It was small, poorly drawn. It showed part of the back of the house, a faulty fence and what looked like a dirt road. "One day we'll get out of here, but it has to be at the right time. It has to be strong. If it's earlier, it'll take, and when it does, it won't let go." I could only shake my head. For the first time in a long time, I felt something akin to hope. Even if it was crooked, weak hope, it still burned inside. We went back to our rooms quietly. That night I slept with the map inside my pillow. One more treasure saved. I woke up with swollen eyes, but with a breath of fresh air. Over the next few days, we started meeting up more often, quickly, in hidden corners. Ava taught me how to pretend better, how to win over the woman with the accent, how to smile at visitors. She said that the more they think you're weak, the easier it is to fool you. I started to learn. Arthur was pleased. He thought I was finally shaping up. He even commented one evening with tea, "You're becoming exactly what we need." At the time, I smiled, but inside, I laughed differently, because now I knew what to do. One Sunday during lunch, I saw that one of the younger girls was shaking a lot. Julia, if I'm not mistaken. She must have been about 8. She was eating slowly, her gaze glued to the door. It turned me inside out. Ava noticed too. Then, in the garden, she whispered, "She's next. They're preparing it." I thought about it for days. I remembered myself at that age. I remembered the orphanage, how it all started with compliments, a pretty bow, an extra sweet. It was the same script, only the names changed. Ava began to draw up a plan. She said that the back fence had a weak point. If we could get out that way on a rainy night, we might confuse the dogs. But I had to wait for the supply truck. It came every Friday. It was the only chance I had to drive down the road without being noticed. But that week, everything changed. Arthur received a new group, visitors, people who spoke softly and smoked cigars. They said they had come to meet the chosen ones. The woman with the accent was more tense. The corridors were washed twice in one day. The girls were combed and made up. And there I understood that this wasn't just a secret shelter. It was an auction. The day before the visit, Ava didn't show up. I waited for hours in the shed. Nothing. I came back with a heavy chest. At breakfast the next morning, she wasn't there. Not at the chores. Not even in the cafeteria. When I asked, the woman with the accent just said, "Ava is being reassigned." But I knew what that meant. And it was there, my dear, that another part of me was born. One that was never going to shut up again. It took me 2 days to accept that Ava wasn't coming back. On the first day, I searched every corner of the house with my eyes. The kitchen, the laundry room, even the back patio. On the second, I lay down the whole time, feigning fever. I just wanted the right to feel the emptiness without anyone looking. It hurt, more than anything they'd ever done to me, because when they take away someone who gives you courage, you realize the size of the hole around them. And now, I was alone again. But different from the Francine who had arrived there, this one already knew too much. On Monday morning, Arthur showed up early. He knocked on the door with 2 soft knocks, as he always did. I opened it without saying anything. He was carrying a small box in his hands. Inside were new clothes, 2 pairs of shoes and a hairbrush with my name engraved on it. That kind of gift you don't refuse, and you don't thank him for either. He noticed my expression and tried to soften it with sweet words. "Francine, this week will be important. Very special people are going to meet you. I want you to be ready." I nodded, with no desire to know more. He held out a piece of laminated paper with instructions on how to behave. Basic rules, according to him. Sit up straight. Speak only when asked. Keep smiling. Show obedience. It was like reading a product manual. Over the next 3 days, I was trained more rigorously. The woman with the accent even taught me how to tilt my head, how to keep my hands on my knees, how not to blink too much. She repeated all the time that kindness was a weapon, and that silent sympathy captivated more than any conversation. And I memorized every word, not because I believed it, but because I knew that if I did it right, I might be able to escape. On Thursday afternoon, the men arrived. 3 black cars, all with dark windows. Suit-clad men got out, their hair combed with gel, their voices firm, all very gentle on the outside but with eyes that scanned the room like those who pick out merchandise. I was taken to the main hall, along with 2 other girls I barely knew. They lined us up like in a silent theater. One of them approached me, watched me for a few minutes, then whispered something in Arthur's ear. I couldn't understand, but Arthur smiled, that smile of his, and I knew that something had been decided there. After the presentation, we were sent back to our rooms. The woman came up to me shortly afterwards. "You're going away for the weekend. A family wants to get to know you better. Get ready." Her tone was calm, but what she said was a sentence. The night before I left, I didn't sleep. I packed the small suitcase with the items I'd been given. Formal clothes, a toothbrush, a little perfume. There was no room for anything of mine, no souvenirs, no papers from Ava, no hidden notes. Everything I was needed to fit into an obedient smile. The car came at dawn. Arthur accompanied me to the entrance. Before I got in, he grabbed my arm and said, "Remember, you are what we show the world, not what you feel. Never forget that." The journey was long and uncomfortable. The driver didn't speak to me. He just followed the route precisely. We passed open countryside, small towns, until we arrived at an elegant house with a perfectly trimmed garden. There, a couple was waiting for me at the door, smiling, tidy, fake, like everything else about the situation. The woman, tall and slim, shook my hand as if I were porcelain. The man, his eyes too fixed, called me darling and invited me in. Inside the house, everything sparkled. The walls had expensive paintings. The furniture looked as if it had never been used. But the air there was heavy. They served me tea. They talked about the importance of discipline and good manners. They told stories about trips, parties, famous acquaintances. When they talked about adoption, they used terms like mutual opportunity, benefit, and expectations. Nothing about love, nothing about care. It was an unwritten contract, where I came in as a decorative part. I spent 2 days in that place. I slept in a room without a lock, but with a camera in the corner. They watched everything, even how I folded the sheet. The woman tested me all the time. She told me to remake the bed, repeat sentences, answer questions out of turn. The man, well, he just watched. But that was enough to keep me awake. On Saturday night, something happened. We were in the living room. I was sitting on a bench. She was combing my hair. He came in and asked to be alone with me. The woman hesitated, but she left, and I froze. He sat down next to me. He talked about the future. He said that if I turned out the way they expected, I'd have everything. Travel, nice clothes, and education. But for that, I needed to trust and obey. His words echoed in my head. Obey? It wasn't a request, it was an order. When he stood up, he put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me as if he had already won. And maybe he had, because at that moment, I didn't react. I just stood there. With my body shaking and my head far away. The next morning, I went back to Arthur's house. The woman with the accent greeted me like someone receiving a return package. No smile, just a dry sit down. And there, in front of me, were 3 pieces of paper on the table. One with the name of the family, the other, a term of continued interest. And the third was a calendar. She said, "In 3 weeks you'll go back there." They set their date. Returning from that house was like coming out of one nightmare and falling into another. Because there, in the shelter, at least I knew where I stood. I knew the game. I knew where the stones were along the way. But in that mansion, it was all so disguised that it seemed worse. It was like smiling in front of a trap. And the cruelest thing, they told me I'd be going back there, with an appointment. The 3 weeks passed slowly, each day dragging on with the taste of a bitter weight. The woman with the accent increased her strictness in class. She corrected my posture even when I sat down to eat. She made me repeat whole sentences in British English, as if my voice needed to be adjusted to the environment. I repeated it, without question. But inside, something was boiling, as if my body knew it couldn't just obey anymore. Arthur continued to show up almost every afternoon. He came in with the same smile as always, feigning concern. He would ask questions as if he were a friend. "Are you comfortable? Did you like the food today? Have you been sleeping well?" And I always answered the same. "Yes, sir," because any deviation I already knew came with a consequence. I began to notice things that I hadn't noticed before. The number of new girls was increasing, but almost none stayed for more than 2 months. They disappeared. No warning, no goodbye. Most came back different, if they came back at all. Their eyes were empty, their speech lower. Some didn't speak at all. It ate me up inside. One night, while I was pretending to sleep, I heard footsteps in the corridor. It was 2 men. I couldn't see who they were, but I heard the muffled conversation. One of them was saying, "That one is ready. The other one still needs more time. They were talking about me," and someone else. The phrase kept ringing in my head for hours, and that morning I made my decision. I wasn't going back to that house. I wasn't going to give myself up again. If anyone was going to decide my fate, it was going to be me. I waited until dawn the next day to act. At the cafe, I sat next to one of the older girls. We had never spoken much, but she was watching me from afar. Perhaps she suspected something. I approached her carefully, like someone asking a favor without words. At the right moment, I whispered, "Did you know about Ava?" She didn't answer, but her gaze changed. And there, I realized that I did. She looked away, waited for no one to be around, and said softly, "Ava kept things. She had a hiding place behind the bookcase in the reading room. See if it's still there." The rest of the day was torture. I had to find what Ava had left, but without arousing suspicion. I took advantage of a moment when the woman with the accent left the room and ran to the library. I pretended to be looking for an etiquette book. Behind the central bookcase, where old books were gathering dust, I found a loose board. I carefully removed it. Inside was a small metal box. Inside were a few folded papers, a children's necklace, and a piece of cloth with a key tied to it. I opened the papers right there. They were maps, small ones, scribbled on. One showed a route to the back of the house. Another showed a trail through the woods with notes on time and distance. On the last one there was a note. "If you think that, you've understood everything. Wait for a moonless night. Use the key in the tool shed. Follow the trail on the left, not the one by the fence." I closed the box with my heart racing. I hid it again. I left as if nothing had happened. I spent the whole afternoon thinking about what to do. I needed courage, and I needed luck, but more than that, I needed time. That same evening, the weather turned. Clouds covered the sky. The rain started before 10 o'clock, heavy, with thunder that rattled the windows. And there I realized that maybe this was my chance. I waited for everyone to go to sleep. I kept my clothes on under my sweater. I hid the necklace in my bra. I took the key and went, step by step. No hurry, no hesitation. When I got to the shed, I was shaking so much that I could barely fit the key in, but it went in. It opened with a dry click. Inside, total darkness. I had to grope around. I found a flashlight, rusty but still working. I wrapped it in a cloth, like Ava had done. I went off to the side, following the map. The trail was full of undergrowth, thorns scratching my leg, mud clinging to my feet, but I kept going. Every step was a scream inside me, a cry of fear, of desire, of everything together. I didn't know where it would lead, but anywhere was better than there. It took me more than an hour to find the dirt road. I could hardly see anything. It was covered in mud, and the rain was still coming down heavily, but it was a road. It was outside the walls, outside the bars. Running on that soggy road was like stepping into a nightmare. The mud pulled at my feet. The darkness made me trip over invisible roots. Each step was an absurd effort, but stopping was not an option. The rain was pounding down. The cold was biting, and yet my body was burning from the inside. It wasn't fever. It was fear, anger, the desire to disappear and never come back. The silence of the early morning was only interrupted by the snapping of branches and the sound of my own breath, gasping for air. I knew that at some point they would notice my absence, and when that happened, Arthur was going to make no effort. I knew his smile, but I also knew the weight of frustration at losing control, and men like him, when they lose control, become dangerous. After perhaps an hour or so, I saw a dim light in the distance. It was a simple building, probably a road shed. I approached slowly, each step measuring the risk. I wasn't sure if finding someone was the solution or the problem, but I couldn't walk any further. My body was asking for a break, and even though I didn't trust it, I knocked on the door. It took a while, but someone answered. An elderly man with small eyes and a sparse beard. He looked at me suspiciously, as if he saw a ghost. I was soaking wet, shivering, with mud all over my clothes and the deep, sad eyes of someone who no longer knew what rest was. "What are you doing here, miss?" I couldn't answer straight away. My throat hurt, and my mouth was dry. I just raised my hand slowly, showing Ava's necklace. It was all I had, a symbol that I really was, that I existed, that I needed help. He hesitated, but opened the door. He let me in, without saying another word. He gave me a blanket and a glass of water. Only after I sat down and the silence became less frightening did he ask, "You came from the big house, didn't you?" I nodded. I didn't even try to hide it. He was silent for a while. Then he sighed deeply and said, "You're not the first, but I hope you'll be the last." I didn't understand what he meant at first, but over the course of the evening he told me that road had seen other girls pass by. Not all of them reached him. Some were taken back. Others disappeared. He never knew exactly what went on in there, but he knew it wasn't just shelter, and he knew that nobody wanted to talk about it. The authorities pretended they didn't see it. The city preferred to forget. It was easier. I cried there, my face covered by the blanket, not out of pain, but out of relief. For the first time, someone believed me, without questioning, without trying to mold me. I just listened. The next morning, he gave me dry clothes, a piece of stale bread, and said he had a friend in a nearby town, a woman who helped runaway girls, those who never had anywhere else to go. He put me on an early bus, with a ticket paid for by himself, and handed me a piece of paper with the woman's name on it, Helen. He said she would understand everything. The bus went on for hours. I kept looking out of the window the whole time, afraid that some black car would suddenly appear. But nothing happened. No one came. And little by little, my heart slowed down. My body began to understand that it was outside the fence. When I arrived, Helen was already waiting for me at the bus station. She was a woman with gray hair, marked skin, and a look so firm that it would make anyone think twice before lying. She hugged me without saying a word, and in that embrace, I collapsed. I spent the first few days at her house unable to talk much. I just slept. She woke up frightened, afraid to hear Arthur's voice, to see the woman with the accent coming through the door. But Helen was patient. She'd leave food by the bed, clean clothes, and sometimes she'd sit next to me without saying a word. And that, incredible as it may seem, was more healing than any conversation. Over time, I began to count, in bits and pieces. First the orphanage, then the house, finally, what I had become in there. And she never interrupted me. She just listened. Sometimes she held my hand. Sometimes she cried in silence. But she never questioned, never tried to soften. "You're a survivor, Francine," she said one day. "But you don't have to carry that name forever. Here, you can just be a girl." It tore me apart, because I didn't even remember what it was like to be just a girl anymore. No label, no role, no fear. I started helping out around the house, tidying the rooms, cooking, doing the laundry. Helen introduced me as her niece. Nobody asked anymore. It was as if the outside world had accepted my escape without requiring any justification, and that gave me room to breathe. But the peace, as always, was short-lived. One afternoon, on my way back from the fair, Helen called me into her room. She had the newspaper in her hands. On the front page, there was an article. "Teenager missing from charity shelter, still hasn't been located." And there was my photo. Out of date, but still recognizable. Full name, date, address of the shelter. She looked at me firmly. "The city hasn't forgotten you, Francine, and they're going to look." I shivered. Then she said, "But now it's up to you. If you want to disappear, I'll help you. If you want to report it, I'm here too." At that moment, I realized that running away had only been the beginning. The news in the paper was like a hand pulling me back to the bottom. As much as I already knew they were after me, seeing my photo printed there, along with those words that said "disappeared," reminded me that I wasn't free yet. I was far away, hidden, protected by Helen, but not free. I stayed up all night, lying on the sofa in the living room, listening to the wind through the gaps in the window. It wasn't fear of being found, exactly. It was deeper than that. It was knowing that, even far from that place, he was still following me, that the name Francine Holloway still carried the weight of everything they had done to me. Helen noticed my silence the next day. She didn't ask. She just put a mug of hot tea on the table, sat down across from me and stayed there, as she always did. After a while, she spoke quietly. "You don't have to decide today or tomorrow, but if you want to report it, I know people who can listen." I thought about it for a long time, for weeks. Every time I went out into the street and saw someone who reminded me of Arthur, my body stopped. Sometimes it was just a suit, a similar voice, a car with dark windows. But it was enough to bring me back. Every detail brought back a memory I'd rather forget. I tried to write a statement. Several times. I'd take the notebook Helen had given me and start, but I always stopped at the third line. How to tell it in ordinary words? How could I explain what I had been made to be without it sounding like an exaggeration? Because that's what I was afraid of, that they'd think I was making it up, that they'd say it was trauma, a child's imagination. On one of the nights when insomnia overcame me, I went out onto the balcony and sat down with the blanket on my lap. Helen appeared shortly afterwards, offered me a hot chocolate and said, "When I was your age, I ran away from home too, not because of the same thing, but because of a father who beat and a mother who pretended not to see." That caught me off guard. It was the first time she had spoken about herself. "And do you know what hurt me the most?" she continued. "It wasn't the beating. It was the silence afterwards, that feeling that no one was going to get me out of there. I kept quiet, but I felt something inside opening up. One day, I decided I was going to speak out, whoever it was too, scream if I had to. And when I did, nobody believed me. But do you know what changed? I stopped swallowing. That conversation hung around for days. I started writing again, but this time in secret, not for denunciation, just for me, a letter to Avenue, telling me what had happened since she disappeared, how I escaped, how I found Helen, how sometimes I still woke up with her name on my lips. I wrote 3 pages. I cried on all of them, but I wrote them. Helen read it when I left it on the bedside table without signing it. She knew it was mine. The next day she gave me a folder of documents, fake but safe, a new name, a city far away, a place where I could start again without looking back. "If you want, it can be now," she said. I looked at the folder like someone facing a fork in the road. To start again. Was that what I really wanted? Erase everything? Disappear? Become someone else? But, oh well, I wasn't finished with that story yet. The following week, my hands shaking, I walked into a police station, alone, with Ava's letter in my pocket. I said I needed to talk. I had things I'd been keeping for years. I was listened to by a woman, young, but with an attentive eye. He didn't interrupt me. He didn't laugh. He didn't question when I said things with pauses, trying to find words that didn't hurt so much. It was hours in there. Then came the papers, the formal questions, the waiting. 2 weeks later they called me back. Arthur had been located. The house had been investigated. The woman with the accent, missing. The girl's records partly destroyed, but they had found something. Photos, notes, names. Helen hugged me tightly when I came home that day. "Now you've started to kill the monster, and it won't come back in one piece." But what nobody told me, and what I only understood later, was that the biggest monster wasn't him. It was the guilt that remained. The day they called to tell me that Arthur had been arrested was not what I had imagined. I thought I would feel victory, relief, even joy, but nothing came. I stood looking at the disconnected phone, feeling an emptiness that seemed greater than before, as if the whole struggle had only been a beginning and not the end. Helen found me sitting on the balcony, my full cup still steaming. I hadn't taken a sip. She sat down next to me without saying anything, as was her custom. After a while, she asked calmly, "Do you want to go over there?" I knew what she was talking about. The orphanage, that house, the places where my story began to tear itself apart. For a moment, I wanted to say no, that I was fine, far away, safe, but the truth was that it still pulled at me, even from a distance. I couldn't end it without looking at it head on. 2 weeks later, I went with her to Clarksville. The town seemed smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd grown too big inside. St. Lydia still existed, with a different sign, a new name and a changed direction. But the building was the same. The new paint job didn't hide the past. I stood on the other side of the street for minutes, unable to cross. The windows stared at me like glass eyes. They seemed to know who I was. Helen held my hand. She didn't say anything, but the gesture was enough. I took a deep breath and went. I was greeted by a smiling woman, one of those who tries to offset the heaviness of the place with sympathy. I explained who I was. She widened her eyes. I asked to see the archives, the old ones. She hesitated. She said that a lot had been lost in the transition, but I could go in and look at what was left. Walking through those corridors was like walking inside myself. Every door, a fright. Every creak, a muffled scream. The cafeteria still smelled of thin soup. The dormitory seemed smaller. The principal's office, locked. I asked for the key. She said they didn't use it anymore. It was just storage now, but I insisted, and she brought it. Inside, everything had been piled up. Boxes, old books, broken furniture. But in the corner there was still the chair, the one where she used to make me sit, and next to it the bookcase where the notebook was, the same one where Margaret wrote down who was good. I looked through it. It wasn't there anymore, but the emptiness in the cabinet seemed to scream. I couldn't stand it. I cried, right there, alone, for the girl I was, for the one who never came back, for the one who was still screaming inside me without anyone to hear. Helen found me sitting on the floor. She helped me up, not in a hurry. Then she took me to the car without a word. And in that silence, I let a part of me stay there, as if to say, "It's yours now, not mine." We then went on to another stop, the house where Arthur had taken me, or what was left of it. It was on the outskirts of the neighboring town, more isolated than I remembered. The walls were cracked, the gates rusty. It had been invaded, looted, forgotten. The new owner of the land, warned of the investigation, let me in. She said she intended to demolish it. Nobody wanted it standing. Inside, the damage was different. The hall where the girls performed was empty, but you could imagine it. The rooms were full of dust. The library was bare of books. I found Ava's bookcase, or what was left of it. I moved it by instinct, out of habit, but there was nothing else. And then, in the back room, I found what took me apart. In a corner, between boards and an old blanket, was a doll, small, made of cloth, little blue clothes, woolly hair. I remembered that doll. It was Julia's, that little girl who trembled in the cafeteria, who we knew would be next, the one who disappeared before me. I picked it up carefully. I hugged it like someone holding a piece of another life. I took it with me. On the way back, in the car, I said to Helen, "We'll never be the same after all this." She replied, looking at the road, "Good." Over the next few days, I started giving interviews, with my face hidden but my voice firm. I spoke to reporters, with lawyers, with other girls who had also come out of places like that. Many wrote to me. Some recognized me from my story, from the way I told it. One of them was Amy. Yes, the one from the orphanage, the one who had disappeared without explanation. She met me at one of the support meetings. As an adult, her hair tied back, her eyes still sad but alive, she hugged me tightly. And there, I understood that some of the pain had been worth it, because she had survived too. And now, together, we could count. And telling, my dear, is like taking the poison out of your body. Slowly. It hurts. But saving. That meeting with Amy touched me more than I could have imagined. Time had passed. Her features were adult, but one look was all it took to recognize who she was. It was as if the past had come full circle, just to bring us face to face. She saw me first. She came into the room with a suspicious expression, like she was expecting to be disappointed. When our eyes met, the tension broke, and the hug happened before any words were spoken. We sat together in a far corner. While the other women shared their stories, we just listened, unable to speak immediately. After the group finished, she held my hand, squeezing it with a strength that made me understand. She too had carried everything alone for a long time. We talked until late that day. She told me that, after the orphanage, she was taken to another shelter in another state, one of those that pretends to be a home, but is just a dumping ground for pain. She said that for years she thought it was her fault, that maybe she had done something to deserve what she had experienced, and when I heard that, I felt an anger that I didn't even remember existed. "We didn't deserve any of it, Amy," I said. "The only thing we did was to be born where no one wanted to see." She cried. So did I. It was as if together we tore away a part of the silence that still clung to our skin. We decided right then and there that we couldn't keep quiet any longer, or run away. We'd done that for long enough. We started attending more meetings. Every week more faces. Girls who had never been heard, women who had kept horrors as if they were their own faults. Each story was like a shattered mirror. You could see pieces of me in almost all of them. Helen, always by our side, began to organize a support network. She used her old contacts, wrote letters, and made phone calls. We created a group with former residents of St. Lydia's and other similar places. We started documenting each case, collecting names, dates, evidence. Little by little, things grew. It was, in the meantime, that a lawyer called Brenda approached us. She had heard one of the interviews and offered to represent the group. She said that the state needed to be held responsible, that letting the whole thing go would be collusion. I didn't even know how to respond. I always thought my story was too small to become a complaint. But she looked me in the eye and said, "You're the first domino. If you fall, the rest will fall with you." I accepted. The case was opened. It took a long time, full of comings and goings. Arthur was summoned, questioned, indicted. They discovered that he was involved in a much larger network, with political connections, money, influence. The woman with the accent? Missing to this day, but they already knew her name, and where she had been in recent years. The trial took place in a small court in a neighboring town. I was called to testify. When I walked in, my knees buckled. The chairs, the judge, the stacked papers, everything seemed too big for me, but the room became smaller when Arthur was brought in handcuffed. He looked at me, and I looked back. There was no more fear, just a kind of disgust at how much smaller he looked now, how the cheap suit and scruffy beard didn't suit the man who thought he was untouchable. When they called me to the witness chair, I sat down with my back straight, and I told them everything. No frills, without pause, without pity. I told about the lavender-scented room, of the false smiles, of the eyes that seemed to promise home and delivered prison. I told of the green bow, of the promise of adoption, the night that never ended. He tried to look away. He feigned disinterest, but I kept talking, because that was the only time I was in charge. And he listened. Other girls spoke too, some with shaky voices, others angrily, all with truth. And the truth, my dear, is what tears down well-dressed lies. Arthur was convicted, not for everything he owed, but enough not to get out any time soon, and for everyone to see that his name now carried a different weight. When it was over, I left the courtroom with a heavy heart. It wasn't relief yet, it was a mixture of things, as if I had buried someone and been born again on the same day. We stood there, me, Amy, Helen, and the others, a group of women who bore scars that didn't appear in the photos, and yet standing there. We made a deal that afternoon, that no one would ever grow up thinking it was normal, that no girl would ever hear that she had to obey in order to be loved, that silence would never again be imposed as a virtue. And it was there, right at that moment, that I understood. The revenge we were hoping for would never come in the form of a shout. It would be in words. After the trial, it took a while for life to get back on track. Not that it ever really did. When things break, they don't stick like they used to. But little by little, I learned to walk with the pieces, not to forget, but to remember in a way that didn't destroy me every day. I went back to Helen's house where everything began to change. The room was the same. The window still creaked when the wind hit it. But now there was more than silence. There was peace. Those first nights after the sentence were strange. I expected to wake up scared, to hear footsteps in the corridor, to hear a voice telling me to get dressed and smile. But it didn't come, and the emptiness of the absence of terror was what confused me the most. For a while, I just watched the world. People walking without carrying secrets, couples fighting over things, mothers with children in their arms, caring for them as if they were their most precious possession. It all seemed like fiction to me, as if I had been dropped onto a planet where things worked properly. But little by little, I began to allow myself. First, small outings. Then a painting class that Helen insisted I take. The teacher looked at me differently when she saw the first drawing. A girl sitting on a bench, her feet dangling, and a green bow in her hair. She didn't understand, but she didn't ask, and that was enough. Over time, I began to be asked to speak at schools, in support groups, sometimes at smaller events. I told parts of the story, always in my own way. No flourishes, no forced drama, just the facts, the pain, the confusion, the forced silence. I was often told that I was brave. I smiled, but I knew that the real courage was to keep living. Amy did too. She went on to study. She studied psychology. She wanted to understand why certain people became monsters. But more than that, she wanted to know how to save those who fall into their web. She became a trauma therapist. Sometimes she sends me messages with drawings that children draw after their sessions. She says she sees a bit of us in each one. Helen. Ah, Helen. She grew old with the dignity of someone who dedicated her life to rescuing others. She's still going strong, stubborn as ever. She keeps the house open, welcomes girls, women, even mothers with small children, people who have nowhere else to go. I help in any way I can. Food, clothes, presents. Sometimes I just listen. Sometimes I tell them, always with the same goal, to let them know they're not alone. Not long ago we were invited to an event in Nashville, a national meeting on adoption and temporary homes. They talked about laws, protocols, rights. When they called me up to the stage, I swallowed. I was in front of politicians, judges, social workers, people who, in another era, would have ignored me. I took the microphone with a firm hand, and I said, "My name is Francine Holloway, and when I was 6 years old I was told that obedient girls gained families faster." Silence. One of those that hangs in the air. But I didn't stop. What nobody said was that in order to be chosen, I had to learn to disappear, to learn not to exist. Today, I'm not asking for justice. I am justice speaking. I exist. And every time I speak, a part of the silence dies. There was applause, people crying, people uncomfortable, but I didn't care. I wasn't there to please. I was there to remember, because forgetting was never an option. Today, I live in a simple little house, in a place where nobody calls me nice, where I can sleep without locking the door twice, where the name on the mailbox is mine, not imposed. I have plants that I look after as if they were daughters, a hammock on the balcony, and a pile of notebooks where I keep writing. Ava's letter is kept in a wooden box, along with Julia's doll and the green bow I wore on that trip. Every now and then I open it, I read it, I cry, then I close it, but I never hide it, because if there's one thing I've learned, my dear, it's that there's nothing braver than a woman who has chosen to tell, who faced the world with the voice they tried to rip out. And if you've listened this far, if you've stayed with me until this last breath of memory, know this, you are also part of the cure. The story of this old woman ends today, but what began with pain now lives on as a warning, and perhaps as a seed. If you can still hear me, tell me where you're from, because knowing that my voice has reached you, even after everything, is the greatest gift I could ever receive. Thank you, darling, I really do. Be at peace, and never, never shut up.